The wind in Wyoming did not just blow. It bit. Eva Vance stepped down from the stagecoach and gasped. The frozen mud groaned beneath her boots. Back home in Georgia, winter was soft. This cold had teeth. She pulled her wool shawl tighter. It did little to help. Her silk traveling dress was 2 seasons out of fashion. The hem was frayed and patched. Yet, Eva kept her chin high. Her mother had taught her one important lesson. Walk like a queen, even when your pockets are empty. But Coldwater Flats was not a ballroom. It was a scar on the frozen earth. The town fell dead silent. A row of miners outside the saloon stopped talking. They stared. A woman on the boardwalk leaned close to her neighbor, whispering behind a gloved hand. A young boy pointed a dirty finger until his mother slapped his hand down. They all knew who she was. The mail-order bride. She reached back into the coach for her traveling bag, and that was when the first man moved toward her. Big, rough-coated, smelling of whiskey and copper ore. He didn't say anything. He just stepped into her path and grinned. "Well now," he said. Sterling's mail-order bride. Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Eva's fingers tightened on her bag. She met his eyes without flinching. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the soft, precise vowels of Charleston. "You're standing in my way." The man laughed harder. He reached out and flicked the frayed edge of her sleeve. Fancy talk for a woman who got sold. Her face went still. Not blank. Still. The way a person goes still when they've decided not to give anyone the satisfaction. Then a sound cut through the cold air. Not a shout. Not a warning. Just the deliberate creak of a carriage door. The crowd shifted. A black coach had stopped at the edge of the street. Eva hadn't heard it arrive. The horses were enormous, dark as coal, standing without fidgeting in the bitter wind. The man who stepped down from it moved the way mountains move. Slowly. With absolute certainty that nothing would be in his way. He was tall enough that Eva had to adjust her gaze upward. His coat was heavy fur-lined wool, his jaw was set like iron, and his eyes, when they found her, were the gray of a sky before a serious storm. He didn't look at the miner. He walked directly to Eva, and without a word, without a question, he took her traveling bag from her hand and placed his other hand at the small of her back. The touch was firm, deliberate, a statement made in front of witnesses. The miner stepped aside. Silas Sterling guided Eva to the carriage, handed her up the step, and climbed in after her. The door closed. The horses moved. Eva sat very straight on the leather seat, her hands folded in her lap, her heart hammering somewhere behind her ribs. "Thank you," she said. Silas looked out the window. "Don't thank me," he said. "I paid for the privilege." The words landed flat and honest. Eva absorbed them. "Then I suppose we understand each other," she replied. He glanced at her then. Just briefly. Something shifted in his expression, too small to name. Outside, Coldwater Flats fell away behind them. Sterling Ranch was not what Eva had imagined. She had imagined something rough. Functional. A working man's house built for utility and nothing else. Instead, the main house rose 3 stories against the darkening sky, stone and timber, with wide covered porches and windows that caught the last light like amber glass. It was grand. It was also deeply, profoundly lonely. She felt that the moment she stepped inside. The rooms were large and well-furnished, and entirely without warmth. No flowers. No personal photographs. No evidence that anyone had ever sat in the parlor simply to sit. A housekeeper named Mrs. Aldridge met them at the door, a compact woman with efficient eyes who showed Eva to her room without ceremony. The room was on the 2nd floor, separated from Silas's by the length of a long hallway. Eva unpacked her 3 dresses, her mother's Bible, and the small leather ledger she carried everywhere. She set them on the writing desk by the window and looked out at the dark land stretching away in every direction. She had made a bargain. She intended to keep it. The first week was a careful negotiation of space. Silas rose before dawn. Eva heard his boots on the stairs each morning before the sky had lightened. He ate breakfast alone, left instructions with Mrs. Aldridge, and was gone to the range or the mine before Eva came down. The silence of the house was a heavy thing. Eva woke up at 5 a.m. every day. She always heard Silas's heavy boots on the stairs first. He was like clockwork. On the 5th morning, Eva decided not to wait in her room. She walked down to the kitchen. Silas was there. He wore his heavy work shirt. His hair was damp from cold water. He was frying salt pork in a heavy iron skillet. The kitchen smelled of grease and strong black coffee. He did not turn around when she entered, but his shoulders went stiff. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Eva said. Her southern accent sounded strange in the cold, bare room. Silas gave a short nod. Morning. He set a plate on the wooden table. It held 2 pieces of burnt bread and 3 thick slices of pork. He slid the plate toward her. I eat quick, he said. His voice was a low rumble. The men are waiting at the mine. Eva looked at the heavy, greasy food. She did not complain. Instead, she picked up a fork and took a bite. It was salty and tough. She chewed, swallowed, and met his gray eyes. The pork is well cured, she said evenly. But tomorrow, I will make the breakfast. Silas paused. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked at her small, pale hands. Then he looked at her calm face. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, Eva replied. But I like my bread unburnt. And a household runs better when the labor is shared. Something shifted in his iron jaw. He drank his coffee in one long swallow. The flour is in the pantry, he said. He picked up his hat and walked out the door. She spent those first mornings learning the house. Then she found the study. The desk was buried. Invoices, contracts, land surveys, mine reports, all of it stacked in the particular disorder of a man who understood the work, but had no patience for the paperwork. Eva sat down, pulled the nearest stack toward her, and began to read. By the time Silas came in that evening, she had sorted 3 months of accounts into order and found a discrepancy in the railroad contract that had been costing him quietly for 2 years. He stood in the doorway of his own study and looked at her. I didn't ask you to do that, he said. No, Eva agreed. She turned the ledger toward him and pointed to the line. But someone should have. He crossed the room, leaned over her shoulder to look. She was aware of his size, the warmth of him, the faint smell of cold air and leather. He studied the numbers for a long moment. That's $1,200, he said. Closer to $1,400, once you account for the compounding. Eva kept her voice even. Your attorney missed it. Or didn't look. Silas straightened. He said nothing for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Show me, he said. They worked until the lamp burned low. Eva explained the figures. Silas asked questions, sharp and direct, no wasted words. He understood numbers quickly once they were laid out clearly. She had expected impatience. She found instead a focused, almost fierce attention. When Mrs. Aldridge knocked to say supper was cold, Silas looked up as if surprised to find the evening gone. We'll eat in here, he said. It was the first meal they shared. The cold deepened through November. Eva learned the rhythms of the ranch the way she had once learned the rhythms of her father's house. Which doors stuck? Which floorboards spoke? Where the warmth gathered and where the drafts lived. She learned other things too. Silas Sterling was not cruel. He was contained. There was a difference, though it had taken her time to see it. He did not waste words on pleasantries, but he did not waste them on cruelty either. When he spoke, he meant it. When he was silent, he was thinking. He noticed things. She discovered this gradually. The morning she came down with a cough, a pot of honey appeared on the breakfast table without comment. When she mentioned once, only once, that the parlor fire smoked badly, a man came the next day to clean the chimney. When she ran out of writing paper, a fresh supply appeared on her desk before she thought to ask for more. He never mentioned these things. He simply did them. Eva found this more unsettling than unkindness would have been. Unkindness she knew how to manage. This quiet, steady attention she did not know what to do with. One evening she came downstairs late, unable to sleep, and found him in the kitchen. He was standing at the stove in his shirt sleeves, heating coffee, his back to her. The kitchen was warm. The rest of the house was dark. He heard her and turned. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Sit down, he said finally. He poured a second cup without asking. Eva sat. He set the coffee in front of her and leaned against the counter, his own cup in hand, looking out the dark window. You're not sleeping, he said. No. Is it the room? It's the quiet, she said honestly. I'm not used to it. He considered this. Georgia was louder? Georgia was never quiet. She wrapped her hands around the cup. There was always someone nearby. Family. Neighbors. Even at the end, when everything was falling apart, there were people. Silas was quiet for a moment. I've been alone here for 11 years, he said. I stopped noticing the quiet. Eva looked at him. In the lamplight his face was less guarded than usual. The lines around his eyes were deeper than she'd first thought. Not from age alone. From something heavier. Do you miss it? She asked. Having people nearby. He looked at her then, directly, the way he rarely did. I didn't, he said. Until recently. Eva looked back at her coffee. Her heart was doing something she didn't have a name for yet. They sat in the warm kitchen until the coffee was gone, not talking much, not needing to. Outside, the wind moved across the land. Inside, the lamp burned steady. It was the first time Eva felt something close to safe. December brought the first real snow, and with it, the Coldwater Flats Harvest Social. It was held late that year, delayed by weather, and attendance was expected from every family of standing in the territory. Silas told her about it at breakfast, his tone matter of fact. "People will want to meet you," he said. "There'll be talk regardless. Better to give them something to look at." Eva understood. She pressed her best dress, pinned her hair carefully, and said nothing about the nerves that sat cold in her stomach all morning. Eva stood before the small mirror in her bedroom. She wore her best dress. It was dark wine-colored silk. She had mended the lace collar 3 times. It was the only piece of her old life she had left. A knock sounded at her door. It was firm. 2 raps. She opened it. Silas stood in the hallway. He wore a clean black coat, his dark hair brushed back. He held something heavy over his arm. Without a word, he stepped forward and held it out. It was a cloak, deep forest green, lined with thick, soft rabbit fur. It was brand new. It smelled of rich wool and cedar. Eva's breath caught. "What is this?" "The wind comes off the mountains hard at night," Silas said. He did not look at her face. He looked at the thin silk of her dress. "You will freeze in that." "Silas, this must have cost fortune." "I own the timber, Eva. And I own the silver. I can buy a cloak." His voice was flat, but not unkind. He stepped closer. He took the cloak from his arm and draped it over her shoulders. His large hands brushed against the skin of her neck. He was warm, remarkably warm. Silas reached down and fastened the silver clasp at her throat. His fingers were big and scarred, but he moved with strange care. He smelled of winter air and clean soap. He stepped back and looked at her. Really looked at her. "Green suits you," he said simply. Eva's heart gave a strange, unfamiliar flutter. "Thank you." "Let's go," he said, turning toward the stairs. "The town is waiting." The social was held in the town hall, a large timber building strung with lanterns. When Silas handed her down from the carriage, she felt the shift in the crowd before she saw it. Heads turning. Conversations pausing. The particular silence of a room recalibrating. She kept her chin level. She took Silas's arm. He walked her through the room with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never needed anyone's approval. He introduced her to the mayor, to the mine foreman, to the minister's wife. He stayed close, not hovering, present. For a while it was almost pleasant. Then she heard the voice. "That's her." Loud enough to carry. Designed to carry. Sterling's charity case. "Heard her family went bankrupt. Father died owing half of Charleston." Eva's step faltered. Just slightly. "Bought her like a brood mare," the voice continued. "Dressed her up nice, I'll give him that." She knew the man before she turned. Harlan Voss. She had heard his name already, a land speculator who had been trying to buy parcels adjacent to Sterling land for 2 years. He had the red-faced confidence of a man who had never been seriously opposed. He was standing with 3 other men, his glass raised, his eyes on Eva with the particular contempt of someone who believed money made him untouchable. Eva stopped walking. She felt Silas go still beside her. "Voss," Silas said. His voice was quiet. That was the thing about it. It was completely, absolutely quiet. Voss turned, still smiling. "Sterling. Just admiring my wife," Silas said. He moved then. Not fast. Deliberately. He stepped in front of Eva, not to block her but to stand beside her, his hand coming to rest at her waist, drawing her against his side with a firmness that was unmistakably public and unmistakably permanent. The room had gone very still. "Evangeline Sterling," Silas said, his voice carrying easily through the silence, "came to Wyoming because she chose to. She runs my household accounts with more precision than my attorney manages my contracts." He looked at Voss with the gray eyes that had made harder men step back. "She is the most capable woman in this room, and she is mine to protect." He paused. "If I hear her name in your mouth again," he said, "I will remember that your grazing lease on the north pasture comes up for renewal in February." Voss's smile had gone entirely. "We understand each other," Silas said. It was not a question. Voss nodded. "Once." Stiffly. Silas turned back to Eva. His expression was unreadable, but his hand at her waist did not move. "Are you all right?" he asked, low enough for only her. Eva's throat was tight. She nodded. "Good," he said. "Then let's get some air." They stood on the porch outside the town hall, the cold clean and sharp after the warmth inside. The lantern light fell through the windows in long yellow rectangles across the snow. Eva stood at the railing. Her hands were trembling slightly. Not from cold. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did. Silas stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the night air. He'll make trouble for you. He was already making trouble. Silas looked out at the dark street. Men like Voss only stop when the cost gets too high. Eva was quiet for a moment. You called me capable, she said. You are. You've never said that before. I don't say things I haven't decided yet. He turned to look at her then, and in the cold lantern light his face was open in a way she had not seen before. I've decided. Eva looked at him. The man who had bought her passage west. Who had left honey on the breakfast table and never mentioned it. Who had just stood in front of a room full of people and said her name like it was something worth defending. Silas, she said quietly, what did you actually want when you sent for a wife? He was silent for a long moment. The kind of silence she had learned to wait through. I told myself it was the inheritance clause, he said finally. The railroad line. The legal requirement. He paused. I've been telling myself that for months. And now, he looked at her steadily. Now I think I was lonely, he said. And I didn't know how to ask for company any other way. The honesty of it hit her somewhere unguarded. I was terrified, Eva said. When I stepped off that coach, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Had you? She considered the kitchen at midnight. The ledger spread between them. His hand at her waist in a room full of people who had expected her to disappear quietly. No, she said. I don't think I had. Silas reached out then, slowly, giving her every chance to step back. His hand found hers on the railing, his fingers closing over hers, warm and certain. Eva did not step back. They stood like that in the cold, the town quiet around them, the snow beginning again in soft, slow curtains, and for the first time since her father's funeral, Eva Vance felt the particular relief of being somewhere she was not merely tolerated. She was wanted, openly, by a man who did not say things he hadn't decided yet. The ride home was quiet. The carriage moved through the snow-muffled dark, the horses steady, the lantern swaying gently overhead. Eva sat across from Silas. At some point the carriage hit a rut in the frozen road, and she slid sideways on the seat. Silas reached out and steadied her, his hand at her arm, and then he did not let go. She looked at him. I owe you an apology, he said. For what? For the way I spoke to you the first day. His jaw tightened slightly. In the carriage. What I said about paying for the privilege. Eva remembered. She had absorbed it and filed it away and told herself it was simply the truth. It was unkind, Silas said. And it wasn't the whole truth. What was the whole truth? He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the snow fell past the window in silence. I saw you on that street, he said. Standing straight in that ruined dress with that man in your way, and you weren't afraid of him. You were angry. Something moved in his expression. I hadn't seen a woman look like that in a long time. Like she had every right to be exactly where she was. Eva's breath was very quiet. I didn't pick you from a catalog, he said. I picked you because of the letter you wrote. You said you were not looking for rescue. You said you were looking for a fair arrangement with a man who understood the value of work. He paused. I've met very few people who understand that, man or woman. Eva thought of the letter. She had written it at her father's desk the night after the creditors left, her hands shaking, her pride in pieces, forcing herself to be honest because she had nothing left to lose by honesty. I meant every word of it, she said. I know. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. That's why I came to meet you myself. The carriage rolled on through the dark. The ranch lights appeared ahead, warm against the snow. Eva looked at their joined hands. His were twice the size of hers, scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who had built everything he owned from the ground up. Hers were still soft, still carrying the ghost of a life that no longer existed. Together they looked like something that shouldn't fit. And yet, Silas, she said. I think I would like to stay. She paused. Not because of the contract. Because I want to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good. Just that. Good. In the voice of a man for whom the word carried the weight of everything he didn't know how to say. Eva leaned her head back against the seat and watched the snow fall past the window and felt the warmth of his hand around hers and thought that perhaps this was what safety felt like when it was real. Not the absence of difficulty. Not the guarantee of ease. Just the certainty that someone would stand beside you when it mattered. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, the way it always did, grudgingly in fits and starts, A warm day followed by 3 cold ones, the snow retreating inch by inch from the south-facing slopes. Eva learned to ride that spring. Silas taught her himself, patient in a way that surprised her, correcting her seat without impatience, letting her find her own balance rather than forcing it. The stallion he chose for her was a gray mare named Patience, steady and honest, nothing like the wild horses of the range. "She suits you," Silas said one morning, watching Eva bring the mare around the paddock. Eva glanced at him. "Because she's manageable?" "Because she's reliable," he said. "And she doesn't spook easy." Eva considered this. "I'll take that," she said. The spring air was crisp, filled with the scent of wet earth. Eva sat on the gray mare, Patience. Silas walked beside her, holding the leather reins. Suddenly, a wild grouse burst from the tall grass near the fence. The bird flapped its wings with a loud crack. Patience snorted. The mare didn't bolt, but she reared back, her hooves lifting from the dirt. Eva lost her balance. She slipped to the side, her fingers losing their grip on the reins. She cried out. Before she could hit the ground, a pair of strong arms caught her. Silas didn't just catch her. He moved with terrifying speed. In one motion, he swung himself up onto the saddle behind her. He pulled Eva tight against his chest. His large hands gripped the reins over hers, pulling the mare to a sudden halt. "I've got you," he muttered near her ear. His hot breath brushed her cheek. "Hold on." Eva was trembling. Her back was pressed hard against his broad chest. She could feel the steady, powerful thud of his heart. He felt like an iron wall, completely safe. The mare settled down, breathing heavily. Silas did not get off the horse. He kept his arms wrapped around her waist, holding the reins. They sat together on the back of the horse under the wide Wyoming sky. "You did well," Silas said. His voice was low and rough. "You didn't scream." Eva let out a shaky breath. She relaxed into his embrace. "I was too busy trying not to die." A low rumble started in his chest. It took Eva a second to realize what it was. Silas was laughing. A real deep sound. He leaned forward, his jaw brushing her hair. "You are a tough woman, Evangeline Sterling." The warmth in Eva's chest was sweeter than the spring sunshine. He almost smiled. She had learned to watch for it, the slight softening at the corner of his mouth, the way his eyes changed before the rest of his face caught up. He didn't smile often. When he did, it felt like something earned. The railroad contract was renegotiated in March. Eva sat in on the meeting, at Silas's request, and twice caught errors in the proposed language that the attorney had missed. Afterward, the attorney shook her hand with the slightly dazed expression of a man revising his assumptions. Silas said nothing about it until they were riding home. "You should have been a lawyer," he said. "Women aren't lawyers," Eva replied. "You should have been the first one." She looked at him. He was watching the road ahead, his profile steady against the pale spring sky. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once. That was enough. The night Silas told her about the war, they were sitting on the porch after supper. The air was finally warm enough to sit outside, the first real warmth of the year, and Eva had brought her mending and Silas had brought his coffee, and they had settled into the comfortable silence that had become their evenings. He touched his left shoulder without seeming to notice he was doing it. Eva had seen him do this before, always when he was tired, always when the day had been long. "Does it hurt still?" she asked. He looked at her, then at his hand. He lowered it. "Sometimes," he said, "when the weather changes." "The war?" "Chickamauga." He said the word flatly, the way people say the names of places that cost them something. "I was 23. Eva set down her mending. "Were you afraid?" He was quiet for a moment. "Afterward," he said. "Not during. During there wasn't time." He looked out at the darkening land. "Afterward I was afraid for a long time." "Of what?" "Of being that helpless again." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I came west because out here a man could build something that was entirely his. Something no one could take in a single afternoon." Eva understood this more than she could say. She had watched everything her family built disappear in less than a year. "And did it work?" she asked. "Did it stop the fear?" Silas looked at her. "Mostly," he said. "It got quieter." He paused. "It's been quieter lately." Eva held his gaze. The porch lamp cast a warm circle around them. Beyond it the land lay dark and enormous and indifferent, and inside the circle of light they were simply two people who had both lost things and found, unexpectedly, that the finding was possible. "Silas," she said. "Eva." She reached across and put her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that until the stars came out, one by one, over the Wyoming dark. The summer brought trouble, as summers in the territory often did. A mining company out of Denver began buying up land to the north, pushing smaller ranchers off their grazing rights with legal pressure and cash offers that were really ultimatums. 3 families sold. 2 held out and found their water access suddenly disputed. Silas rode out to meet with the holdouts. Eva went with him. She had not expected to be included. He had simply said at breakfast, "Ride with me today," and she had gone. The Garrity ranch was small and tired-looking, the house weathered, the barn leaning slightly to the east. Tom Garrity met them in the yard, a lean man in his 50s with the careful eyes of someone who had been disappointed by powerful people before. His wife stood in the doorway. She looked at Eva with the particular wariness of a woman who had learned not to trust the wives of powerful men. Eva climbed down from her horse and walked to the porch. "Mrs. Garrity," she said, "I'm Eva Sterling. I grew up watching my father lose his land to men with lawyers and patience. I know what that looks like from the inside." Mrs. Garrity's expression shifted. "My husband is here to help if he can," Eva continued. "But I thought you might want to talk to someone who understands what it costs." They talked for 2 hours. Eva sat at the kitchen table with Mrs. Garrity, while Silas and Tom Garrity walked the fence lines. By the time the men came back, Eva had a clear picture of the legal situation, the water rights dispute, and the specific clause in the original land grant that the mining company's lawyers had been deliberately misreading. On the ride home, Silas was quiet for a long time. "You knew about the land grant clause," he said finally. "I read the territorial records last winter," Eva said, "when I was reorganizing your files. I thought it might matter someday." He looked at her. The afternoon light was long and golden across the grass. "It matters today," he said. The mining company's legal challenge collapsed within the month. The Garritys kept their land. 2 of the families who had sold came back to Silas asking if there was anything to be done, and Eva spent 3 weeks corresponding with a land attorney in Cheyenne on their behalf. She did not ask Silas's permission. He did not ask her to. One evening he came into the study and found her at the desk, letters spread around her, her hair coming loose from its pins, ink on her fingers. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You're going to run out of desk," he said. Eva looked up. "I'll need a larger one." He nodded seriously. "I'll have one made." She laughed. It surprised them both. She didn't laugh often, not the real kind, not the unguarded kind. It filled the room briefly, and then settled. Silas was smiling. The full kind, not the almost kind. "There it is," he said quietly. Eva looked at him. "What?" "I've been waiting to hear that," he said. "Since January." She felt warmth move through her chest, slow and certain, like the first real day of spring. The inheritance clause was satisfied in June. The attorney came out from Cheyenne with papers, and Silas signed them at the kitchen table with Eva sitting across from him, and the railroad line passed fully into Sterling ownership. Afterward the attorney shook Silas's hand and nodded to Eva and left. Silas sat at the table for a moment, looking at the signed papers. "That's what this was supposed to be about," he said. Eva looked at him. "Is it still?" He raised his eyes to hers. "No," he said. "It stopped being about that a long time ago." She had known this. She had known it since the night in the kitchen with the coffee, since the porch in the snow, since the way he said her name in a room full of people who had expected her to be invisible. But hearing it said plainly, in the quiet kitchen, in the voice of a man who did not say things he hadn't decided yet, was something different. "Silas," she said, "I want to tell you something." He waited. "When I wrote that letter," she said, "I told myself I was being practical, that I was making the best of a bad situation." She folded her hands on the table. "I told myself not to hope for anything beyond a fair arrangement. And now," she met his eyes, "now I think I was wrong to set the limit so low." He stood up from the table. He came around to her side and she stood to meet him, and he took her face in his hands, those large scarred hands, with a gentleness that still surprised her every time. "Eva," he said. "Yes. I'm not good at this," he said. "At saying it. I know. But I need you to know." His thumbs moved along her cheekbones. "Not because of the land. Not because of the contract. Because you walked into my house and made it a home without asking anyone's permission, and I have been grateful every single day since." Eva's eyes were bright. She did not look away. "That's enough," she said softly. "That's more than enough." He kissed her then, not the careful brief kiss of their wedding day, but something slower and more certain, the kiss of a man who had made up his mind and was no longer in any hurry. Outside, the summer wind moved through the grass. The ranch stretched away in every direction, the land Silas had built from nothing, the land Eva had learned to love, the land that was now, without question, theirs. When they finally stepped apart, Eva rested her forehead against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I want children," she said quietly. "If that's something you want." His arms tightened around her. "Yes," he said. Simply. Completely. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the house a door opened, and Mrs. Aldridge's footsteps crossed the kitchen, and then stopped, and there was a small sound that might have been the housekeeper quietly retreating, and then the house was still again. Eva smiled against Silas's shirt. Home, she thought. This is what it feels like. Not the house she had grown up in. Not the life she had planned. Something better. Something chosen. Something real.